I think it would take a lot of time to now list what you have been a pioneer in. You were so ahead of your time. We have the wife of Herbert W. Franke with us, Susanne Pech, wife of Herbert W. Franke, the pioneer of computer art. I think, yeah, he has always been way ahead of his time. So I guess that's what I would like to speak with you about. How it was to be a pioneer, what has changed over the last 5 decades you've been creating work with. You've won so many prizes. Your work has been shown at the most important film festivals. You're an artist and a filmmaker. You're in the most important museums collections. You're part of the Venice Biennale. I'm very happy that we can show your piece here as part of Art NFT Linz. That's on view at the Venice Biennale at the moment. So yeah, let's get started with the conversation. Do we have, by the way, 30 minutes with you or 45? Because I remember you have an appointment.
No, I changed the appointment, so you have 45.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much. So you're probably the most well-known media artist. And today it's quite easy, right, to get also Mario Klingemann, pioneer working with AI. It's like really easy to start working with digital art. You use Photoshop, you have filters, and then if you want, there's the work. But back in your days, how did you get started as a media artist?
Well, I didn't know. Everything I did was made on a cusp of disaster, and the term media art didn't exist. I didn't know that you weren't supposed to use sound or sensors, so I used them. And then I was told that my work wasn't art. In fact, I put it in a museum and they took it out within hours, saying that it wasn't art. And the work couldn't be exhibited from 1972 until 2013. Nobody would show that work. The most important work I did, I think, as some of the early work. So everything that I've done was accidental and was never accepted at art as art and never exhibited. But I figured it didn't matter because you only have time in your life and you want to do with your time things that you find interesting. And if other people want to show it later, that's fine. But it's your choice whether to continue.
And you continued. I also remember that Marina Abramovic recently said and told me herself, because we worked on something together, she was like, yeah, when she started doing performance art, people actually thought she was crazy. And
I was too.
Yeah?
They still do.
Why do they still do? I hoped that would change, at least with being on view at Venice Biennale and winning so many prizes. Also, I think 2 or more at Ars Electronica.
Well, because those things are all based on the past. You know, you do something and eventually after sometimes decades or half centuries that they become accepted, but then you're always thinking about a future way of doing things, and those things aren't accepted or even known about at the time that you're thinking about it. But when I was, for instance, doing Roberta, everybody thought I was schizophrenic and nobody understood that project at the time I was doing it. It happens later, but you have to have faith and do things that you enjoy, make you laugh. So.
Would you like to tell us a bit more about Roberta? I'm not sure if everyone is super familiar with the piece. I can't really tell from the reactions from the audience, but it might be great to briefly hear about it, and then also what you, back then when you made the work, you basically with that also sort of pioneered the topic of avatars and fictional personalities and so on and so on.
Because the work with sound and sensors, which I'm told was the very first work with sound, and the first media work, and that was made in 1964, 65. But after it was thrown out of the museum, I thought I didn't need to show work in a museum, so I just rented a hotel room. And before the word site-specific was even known or founded, and people could go into the room 24 hours a day. And when I was in that room, I was thinking, what if I was to create a character that was fictional, but had all the artifacts of reality? So that's how Roberta Brightmore was born, and it was a character that would go out and interact with the world and have adventures. Everything was documented, and there's a whole archive of her life, and she lived nearly 8 years. Eventually, there were multiples of her as well that would go out and interact with people. And she had her own gesture and voice and walk and words, and saw a psychiatrist and got credit cards when I couldn't because I had bad credit. She had no credit, so she could have a fuller life than I did. So it was really a test of how you perceive reality.
And how did you receive reality back then, and how do you perceive reality today? Because you used to live in San Francisco, very close to the Silicon Valley, and you're friends with Christa Sommerer. She also put us in touch. Her work is on view at the museum here at the moment, and she told me that it really heavily influenced your work, because you also had sort of like access to people one usually doesn't have if you not live close to Silicon Valley. That's why you could be also so much ahead of your time, because then you just started thinking, what does it mean? And
and I think it's true. I think it's different now, but certainly Silicon Valley has influenced the entire world. Everything from Google and Facebook to Ubers and Airbnb all began that way, but now I think that that it's universal, that there are a lot of programmers all over the world. But at the time I was working with these ideas, you kind of breathe the ideas that are in the air. There are a lot of unemployed programmers. So unemployed programmers were looking for things to do and things that could challenge them. So naturally I snatched a lot of them up. I'm still working with them, some 30 years. And also I just put it out word on the internet for people I wanted to. For instance, when I created Agent Ruby, which was really the first chatbot, which was 11 years before Siri. She's smarter, funnier. I basically put out a call and got 18 programmers to work together to try to solve that problem of how you create one.
So you also always had access to people to help you make the work, right? So
you find access.
That's great. And this is a very broad question, but that's basically one of your also main topics, the relationship between humans and technology. And what just came to my mind, that's a pre-question now, because we announced the whole program via Twitter, because that's what what everyone instead of Instagram is sort of like using today. And then I looked for your Twitter and I was like, not much happening. Why isn't that, I don't know.
Well, because there are so many people who have accounts, particularly on Instagram, they put my name on it, and it's not me.
Oh, okay.
So
it's not even you.
It's not me doing it, and I thought it was really appropriate to let everybody else react as me. I knew what I was doing.
I mean, you can't see it, but people in the audience really love hearing you talk. So you won't be active on social media because there's already other people acting as you. So actually, you have quite a few avatars pretending sort of like to be you.
Yeah, I figured it was kind of the just desserts, that I started that with Roberta. So now it means, it's kind of the successful evolution that I don't have to do anything now.
That's a wonderful story. I wish that would be the same for myself, because it takes up a lot of time to be active on Twitter. You're way smarter, I have to say. Back to the main question.
In fact, I did try to start something under my name, and they wouldn't let me because they thought I was a fraud.
Oh my God. Okay, but now you're quite happy with it, and I recommend sticking to it, because then you have actually more time for something else. So what do you think, how has the relationship between humans and technology changed? I mean, that's also sort of like what your last big pieces are about. Maybe you would like to tell us a bit more about that, and also about your piece that's on view here right now and also at the Venice Biennale.
Yeah, well, I think that, it's not technology that's doing it, it's programmers and humans, and technology itself, and programmers are reflective of biases and reflective of what the culture wants. And when you have a consumer society where data is as valuable or more valuable than oil, then you see that there's a change in the collection of facial recognition in people because you could sell them more. It's worth, it's worth money now to capture people's identity online. But it's, as I say, invasive and pernicious because people don't know that their information is being sold and altered, and has sometimes devastating effects to their lives. So that's something that in these last couple projects I was trying to let people know about the cultural prejudices that are affecting them without them knowing about it. But I think in the future, we have to work together with technology to cure the planet, because without a planet, we have no cyborgs, no avatars, no humans, and that's the prime thing right now, is to work together, not just as humans, but as coded human.
And as you've just mentioned, you, with your work, which is also sort of like sometimes like an essay, maybe. In the form of a video piece, and you said it's like very sort of like revealing knowledge or explaining how things work, and that they might not are what they seem to be. What are the reactions to your pieces from the public?
The last two pieces I did, people seem to like that. I wonder what's wrong. But they seem to be wanting to show them a lot more than they did earlier ones, which I thought were also pretty relevant at the time, but people rejected them. But lately they're showing them, maybe because they're shorter. So.
You really think that has to do with length? I mean, I also just spoke with Mario Klingemann, or someone like Manuel Rosner. He's a German artist and has been working with VR since like 10 years. And also Herbert W. Franke, for example, he was so ahead of his time, but it was has only been, he was 95, right? When he actually like really has gotten the recognition he would have deserved maybe already when he started working, but he was such a pioneer in the metaverse already in the early 2000s, right? So do you think, maybe not your recognition, but that people now more understand what you speak about in your work, is that maybe technology is more distributed among people? I guess there must be other reasons than people thinking maybe you're not that crazy.
Well, I think that I had to wait for the millennials to be born, because the younger they are, the more they get it. And that is the natural language of young people, so they can understand it and access it and go into dialogue with it. So it's just a matter of being of having to wait. And
I mean, that sounds like you sort of expected there to be a turn when it comes to the perception of your work. I mean, have you always been sure about that, or were you just hoping, well, maybe at some point when there's a younger generation, they will get it?
No, I never expected anybody to get it, quite frankly, but the turning point for me was when I had a show at CKM, because about 85% of the work had never been shown, and I was 73 years old. So seeing that work and having reaction to that work and the effect of that show is what really changed things for me, because it was taking it serious as my first book, my first show, and that made a huge difference.
Yeah, it's a beautiful publication, I think, by Peter Weibel and 10 or 13 authors contributing essays about your whole body of work. So I can highly recommend that to everyone reading it. And as you've just mentioned, there's there's millennials now, and yeah, everyone is speaking about the metaverse now and games. And with Lorna, you also sort of like pioneered that field of game art. Would you like to tell us a bit more about Lorna, and then we can dig deeper?
I didn't think so much of Lorna as a game, but as a way to create a situation that it extended outside of itself. So you have Lorna sitting in a room, you replicate that room so that a viewer can sit in the same room, use Lorna's remote, control Lorna's actions, the soundtrack, the speed, and interact with her in that way. It was kind of a computer-based. It was I'm told it's also the first computer-based interactive piece that anybody made, and that was started in 1978, so finished in 1982. So it was just an exploration of, rather than having a flat video that goes from beginning to end, what happens in between and making it more sculptural.
And are you still following? I mean, you've just mentioned your show at ZKM, so more and more artists are finally getting long-deserved solo shows. And Alfred Weidinger, the director of the museum here in Linz, I mean, you've also been part of the Proof of Art exhibition that has been on view here. So what he plans to do, that he really wants to give a lot of artists solo shows, which would have deserved it a long time ago, or are even working today. So it seems like museum shows are still relevant, and I think the Radical Gaming show, which was actually about game art and all these topics, was on view at House of Electronic Arts 2 years ago. Hans-Ulrich Obrist, the most important curator in the world, is also now heavily interested in game art. And the funny thing was, I mean, there's this rumor that he tells a story that he buys a book every day, right? And then,
does he read it?
Yeah, I didn't dare to ask that question. I wouldn't know how that's even.
I buy a book every day too, and they sit on my desk. I keep telling myself I can't buy anymore because I don't read them. I skim them. But I think I should. I think if I buy them, it's like I know them. I've read them. So,
that's great. And then I asked him, well, do you still buy a book like every day? And he was like, no, now I buy a game every day.
Wow.
So I didn't ask him if he actually really plays the game like every day, because he was, what's the name of that super complicated game that got like really famous? And does anyone know what I mean? And then I tried it. I don't know. I think you need a couple of months to play it, so I wouldn't even know how to do that. But my question is, like, do you follow like really what's happening today with metaverse and games and NFTs and all these topics? Is that something you are interested in and still follow, or is it like one last thing? Because I've met quite a few of the pioneers of generative art and computer art, and for them, and also for someone like Mario Klingemann, who's in the audience and just said, I had an art circuit, they say, well, I think about a question, then I create work on it, and then I'm done and move on. How is that with you? Have you done one thing and then you move on and don't look what's happening?
I think you have to look at what's happening in your culture, because you could learn a lot. And there are people exploring ways of using the blockchain that, for instance, I wouldn't have thought of. And again, a lot of younger people can see that and see the language and the possibilities of it. So it just adds to your information base or possibilities to use in the future. I don't think you could ignore these possibilities.
Is using the blockchain a possibility for you? Is it something you're exploring?
Not really. I did one because a museum begged me to do it so that they could auction it off. So I did that. But really, I'm interested in exploring other possibilities to tell stories and to do projects. And particularly, this is part 3 of the logic paralyzes your heart is part 3 of the series on cyborgs and how technology is affecting our life. The next one that I'm doing, I have a cyborg that has written her own script, which is a completely different way that I mean, I shouldn't say she, but it writes in a different way than I do, and it's more interesting. So I'm working on that one next.
I mean, when I asked you about the title for this talk or what you would be interested in speaking about, you gave me the title Dreams of a Cyborgian Future.
Yeah.
So cyborgs is something, like you've just mentioned, that have been a topic or part of your work for quite a few years now. And I guess everyone knows Donna Haraway and so on. So how did you get interested in thinking about cyborgs?
Well, I was interested to find out, and a young researcher told me that I was doing them in the 1960s, 10 years ago, 10 years before Donna Haraway, but I was unknown, and I didn't have any access to have anybody know what I was doing at the time. So, and also when I started to do them, it was simultaneous to when the word was created by the military. So I seem to have some capacity to tune into things that are going on in the world and explore them simultaneously. I don't think I'm ahead of my time. I think I'm in my time. And I think most people aren't, that there's a lag that most people live in because it's more comfortable. But so Donna Haraway didn't influence me in that way. I might have influenced her, in fact, if she knew about me.
Oh, I didn't want to say that you were influenced by her. So,
Yeah.
but that's a
I am in her writing. I like her writing a lot.
I mean, that's quite interesting that you've just said you have not been ahead of your time, but it's actually the fact that, like, then basically a lot of people are not, really paying attention to their time. And then I'm thinking, like, because it's always a minority when looking at artists, right? When you look at an artist's work, some of them are always ahead of their time. How would one change that? I mean, is there a way except like creating work and then hoping, like you do now, you say, well, people don't think you're crazy anymore, but they actually started understanding. But is there any other way to also be more people like artists and be more in their time and, thinking intellectually about these topics and like being more reflective?
Well, I think you have to be aware of what's happening in your time and create the mental space for it, which people do in different ways. Some people do it through trances. Some people do it through dreaming. Some people do it by reading everything or seeing everything that they can. There are various ways of letting the information flow through you. And then that infects your brain and you start to think in the language of that people are working in, rather than past languages, and inventing your own language. And you have to trust it too. You have to have confidence in what that what you're thinking is right and worth and has value.
I mean, I guess it took a lot of strength to just keep doing what you were doing. I mean, you must have been really convinced that you're on something.
Well, I couldn't do anything else. I have no talent in the real world. I tried selling shoes and I got fired within a couple hours. I mean,
why?
There's nothing.
Were you not good at selling shoes?
No.
Why?
But I'm trying to do it to make some money because I can't do anything in the real world. So I had no choice than to do what I could do, and just find out other ways to live.
That's beautiful that you got fired, like because you weren't like good at selling shoes. I mean, I guess all of us are quite glad that you were not good at selling shoes. I mean, I don't even want to imagine what else have happened. Maybe you would have ended up selling something else. I don't know, cars, because they make more money than shoes. So yeah, let's quickly speak about because people love your talk so much, I would really like them to give them the chance to ask you a couple of questions. Operator, artist, duo is really excited. I assume they have a lot of questions for you. Not a lot, but probably one or two. So yeah, what are your predictions when it comes to, like, let's say, the future of art and technology, and also cyborgs?
Well, I hope that the future of cyborgian life or technology is geared towards preserving our planet. I think everything else is an illusion. Not that illusions are bad, and maybe preserving our planet is an illusion too. But if we can work with technology, for instance, I just did a project with Harvard and another fellow that I worked with on the antibody to create a system that cleanses plastic from water. And we started that out just because they had the Weiss Institute at Harvard had been developing ideas on how to do that, and I felt that that was an important project to do. So we worked together on that, and actually came up with a plan to do it, and actually did it. It was installed in Basel, this last Basel, and it's going to be in an exhibition in Italy in a couple of weeks. And so, you know, we're working on, hope to work on something with carbon next. And the scientists said that they couldn't have done it without working with me, because I tend to challenge why the logic is of scientists, you know, to think in a linear way or suggest ways that aren't linear. So I think artists can work with scientists and technologists to create new paths towards healing our planet.
Thank you. I really would like to give people in the audience the chance to ask you questions. So I really hope now that you have questions. Operator, yes?
And it's not just the planet. I mean, it's racism, it's sexism, all the toxins that we're dealing with.
Thank you. You're iconic. Okay, since you're in your time and everyone else is not in it and they're lagging behind, you had to, once your work was ripped out of the museum, you brought it to a hotel. So tell me, what does a hotel afford you that a museum cannot?
Well, I rented a room. The hotel didn't give me the room. I rented it, and it was actually very successful because people would go to it. I did it with my friend Eleanor Coppola, and she had a different room, but we just Xeroxed announcements and just taped them up all over, and it got a great audience. And it was the idea of using sound in space, and space that was found. And museums tend to be behind their times. They don't. Very few museums invent things that are in the present. So I found more freedom in going outside of those kinds of structures that are limiting.
Thank you.
I just wanted to write down what you said, but I guess I'll just watch the talk later and then write things down.
I mean, the hotel room lasted a year. The museum piece lasted about 4 hours. So
that's at least 4 hours, one could say. And I found that really interesting that you said, well, I just wanted to write that down, that museums are, one can say, well, it's actually the job of a museum to be not ahead of that time because they actually preserve work, they tell the history of art and so on and so on, so it's basically their job. But I guess you're super right that like very few museums are ahead of that time, and ZKM in Karlsruhe, which you've just mentioned, they have always also been ahead of their time. But then I think there might be also a point when that changes, because it also really needs a lot of a lot of time, you know, I assume, to always make that happen, right? Because you might have people that then work for the museum who also understand everything, but then once they are within the machine, they can't keep up, and then I think that's really tricky for a museum to like really keep up and keep that working over the years. I don't know how Alfred Weidinger does it, but I guess because he's actually quite active on Twitter all the time and sees what people are talking about. He's even on Twitter right now. I just called him. I think he wanted to tweet what you've just said, and now I surprised him.
Who was that you're talking about?
Alfred Weidinger, the director of the museum. He used to be vice director of Albertina in Vienna, then Albertina in Vienna, then Belvedere, then he went to Leipzig and really shook up the city. I think quite a few people were really, I don't want to use the word annoyed, but I think it was really hard for them to understand that there comes a museum director, oh now he's laughing, who puts, and he let me actually curate exhibitions, and I put on, it was and I never thought I never wanted to be a curator, but he gave me the chance because I don't want to speak about myself, but more about him. And then I put the newest generation of feminist artists who were active on social media and Instagram and actually, you know, fighting within their time for like feminism and so on and so on. And people were like really, I mean, the young generation loved it. I think we've gotten 200 reviews internationally, but I think the people in Leipzig, they thought he's a bit crazy. And then we've done the second show, and then, you know, it was again questioned, so why does it even have to be in a museum? I mean, I don't understand why people ask that question, why does it even have to be in a museum? And he's now doing it again, but I think he's doing it in Linz, the UNESCO City of Media Arts. I think they are accepting it and don't think, I think he made the same experience as you. I think people thought he's a bit crazy.
Yeah,
but in Linz he's fine, I guess. Any more questions? Also, maybe Alfred Weidinger would quickly like to say hello. That might be nice. Do you want to actually quickly join me on stage? I mean, I think you should come on stage to say hi to Lynn Hershman Leeson.
Hi.
Hi.
So I very much enjoyed your talk. It's really amazing. And of course I have a question, and maybe it's a little bit unfair to ask it on stage. So I really want to have a cup of coffee with you on one hand, and on the other one, we really would love to exhibit you, just to do an exhibition maybe next year.
Yeah, do it.
All right, then let's see each other next year.
Everybody knows going to do it, so you can't get out of it.
Yeah, all right, sounds great. Thank you. So this was my question. Thank you.
That was a quick yes. Great, thank you. So anyone else with a question? This is your once-in-a-lifetime chance maybe to ask a question to such a pioneer.
Thank you. This was inspiring and enjoyable, and very excited to deep dive into your work after this. I just wanted to ask, as Anika brought up the subject of feminism, if you felt like any of the dismissal of what you were doing in your early days had anything to do with your gender, or do you think it was the fact that you were working with computers and machines and people weren't there, or do you think it was compounded with you're a woman doing weird things with machines and hotels, or like how did that shape your practice at all, or the feminist movement in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s? Did that have any impact on, and if so, how, what you have been creating? Thank you.
Yeah, I think totally. You know, I was from the West Coast. I was working with technology. I was female. I mean, I wasn't the only one that was excluded. And so eventually, I started interviewing other women, starting in 1968, and I interviewed them till 2010. Over the years, so I had 17 hours of Carolee Schneemann and 20 hours of Judy Pack and so forth, and ended up with almost 2,000 hours of information. And I put that together in a video that you can see right now. It's called Women Art Revolution. and that it was in the collection of MoMA, New York. And the film curators said that they found it was one of the most important films they had because nobody knew the story told by the artists themselves, and every single person in it couldn't get a gallery, were rejected, their work wasn't seen. And so it took the feminist movement to go outside of that system and with humor start to deal with issues that the culture was struggling with, like social justice, and do projects in new ways, like through performance, which didn't exist before the feminist movement, in order to tell these stories so that they were heard. So I think it's better now. I mean, I love that young women have entitlement. They didn't in my time. They don't even in my time, women my age don't even feel entitled. And so it's great that young people have that ability to expect that they could show in galleries, that they could own galleries, that they could be critics, be museum directors, because that totally did not exist 50 years ago. So it had a big influence on, that's why I talk about the kind of cultural prejudices that really stifle the creative voices that are opportunities to infect culture with.
I think that's working. I mean, I guess Anya and Deja, you also have, I'm aware that a lot of things have radically changed, but at the same time, it's still difficult for female artists, and we're working together on a project titled Unsigned, because when men sign their paintings, the price goes up. If women sign the paintings, price goes down. So it's recommended to female artists that they should not sign their work, that the price does not decrease. So we started an NFT project and are working with 100 female and non-binary artists, and are basically selling their artistic signature, and it works quite well. And I remember that Anya and Deja, when you invited the artist, you got a bit of feedback. Would you quickly like to share 2 or 3 of the not so pleasant stories you've heard from artists?
Oh yeah, upon asking artists just privately on stage? Yeah. Okay, sure.
Then Lynn can see you.
Hi, Lynn. Hi, yeah, so essentially when we were sending out artist invitations, we got, and these are in private direct messages, people would say things like, thank you for this project. I was making work under a male alias up until 1 year ago, and this is in 2022. Another response was, yeah, I was told by galleries that I can't be represented because collectors won't want to invest in me because they assume I'm gonna get pregnant and then get distracted by the fact that I'm a mom, and so I'm not a good investment. And so they wouldn't represent me. And these are all stories of artists working right now, and they were reflecting on experiences of the last 5 years. So while there has been a lot of progress, even just these little personal anecdotes that artists were telling us when we invited them to the project are really telling of how much work there still is to be done.
Yeah, for sure. I sold something in the early 70s, and the collector found out I was female, and they returned it. And thank God, because they would have paid almost nothing for that piece at the time, which increased in value. And so, you have to look at the long run, and all these works that, like when I had the ZCAM show, nothing was owned pretty much that was in the show. And since that show, they all soared in prices and are owned by major collections. So hold on to your work and don't undersell yourself, because just look forward to the time that this is all going to have value, and find alternative ways. If a gallery doesn't want to show you, you don't want to be with them. A collector doesn't want to have your work, great. You'll find somebody that values it. So that opportunity is there. You just have to start to look beyond tradition.
Thank you. I think you need to take the microphone. Anyone else with a question in the audience? Otherwise, no. Then I very much thank you for your time, and hope you have a great weekend. It was a really great honor having you here and speaking with you. Thank you so much. It was a big pleasure. And we see you next year here anyway in person, because you're going to get a solo show, I heard, just 5 minutes ago.
And a
So
book.
see you next year in person.
Bye.